Did you know that Australia's migration system, once celebrated as one of the world's most generous and forward-looking, is on the cusp of its most dramatic overhaul in decades? Over the past few years, Canberra's open door welcomed hundreds of thousands of skilled workers, international students and family members, fueling a population boom that underpinned economic recovery after the pandemic. But those very newcomers have also strained housing markets, pushed school waiting lists to record highs, and created labour market bottlenecks in sectors from healthcare to hospitality. Now facing a groundswell of public concern over skyrocketing rents, congested hospitals, and a sense that too many outsiders are crowding in, the federal government has signalled a hard pivot. With new caps on permanent residents, tougher tests for temporary visa holders, and a shift to a fully digital e-visa system, millions of people who once believed Australia was their future home may find themselves facing an unwelcome choice. Meet the new, tighter criteria, or pack up and leave. In this video, we'll unpack the 10 key reforms set to take effect in 2025, examine why they're being introduced, and consider what they could mean for Australia's economy, communities, and global standing. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Virtual Travel by Brian, and let us know in the comments what you think of these changes. Now, let's dive into the sweeping new rules that may reshape Australia's migration landscape and alter the lives of millions. Australia's migration story has long been one of vigour and growth. From the post-World War II wave of European arrivals to the global talent and student intake of the past decade, migration has powered population growth, fueled economic dynamism, and diversified every corner of the continent. But by late 2024, the swelling ranks of recent arrivals, both permanent and temporary, had begun to collide with the realities of a nation that blends a high quality of life with finite resources. Housing, once affordable by global standards, now ranks among the most expensive in the world. In Sydney, the median house price soared above AUD 1.1 million in July 2024, representing a 25% increase over 5 years. Meanwhile, wait times for routine medical procedures in some states crept past the 12-month mark, and public school enrollments in suburban corridors went metastasizing, forcing classrooms into borrowed halls. Even the greenfields powering remote work found themselves overwhelmed by bandwidth demands. Regional broadband speeds often still average below 25 Mbps, leaving commuters and students frustrated. Against this backdrop, public opinion shifted. Polling by the Australian Bureau of Statistics in October 2024 showed that for the first time in years, a majority of voters across all major parties believed that migration levels were too high, even if they valued the economic benefits. Migration had delivered. In response, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's government concluded that a fundamental rebalancing was required. Gone, it seemed, were the days when net migration targets could be routinely flexed upward. Instead, ministers promised a more controlled, sustainable system designed to keep population growth in step with infrastructure, housing supply, and labour market needs. The result is a package of reforms set to take effect in mid-2025, reshaping the pathways that have underpinned Australia's post-war success. At the heart of the new strategy lies a substantial cut to Australia's annual migration program, ceiling. For the decade prior to the pandemic, the government routinely aimed for between 190,000 and 195,000 new permanent residents each year, balancing employer-sponsored skilled visas, family reunion places, and humanitarian allocations. In 2022 to 23, more than 200,000 permanent visas were granted, part of a deliberate post-COVID rebound to stimulate economic growth. 38. But by late 2024, that expansion had become politically untenable. Under the revised 2025 plan, the permanent migration program cap will be scaled back to roughly 155,000 places, a cut of nearly 20%. This recalibration is not merely arithmetic, it also reshapes the mix. Skills stream visas, which once made up around 2/3 of the total, now face tighter thresholds on occupation lists and salary requirements. Family stream places will similarly be pared back, with health checks and character tests becoming more stringent. Even the humanitarian stream, which has welcomed tens of thousands of refugees each year, will see a slight freeze in numbers, just enough to maintain international obligations, but not to fully restore the previous backlog reduction. Ministers argue that this reduction will slow house price inflation by tempering demand from new households, freeing up rental stock for long-term tenants, and allowing local authorities to catch up on road, hospital, and school investments. Detractors warn that cutting permanent intake so sharply could create labor market gaps, particularly in regional areas that rely heavily on skilled migrants to staff hospitals, agricultural enterprises, and construction projects. Universities and regional councils have already flagged the risk that too few migrants could undermine workforce planning in critical industries, and the business community has urged caution. As the migration program narrows, the balancing act between easing public service strain and sustaining economic growth becomes ever more delicate. Just as profound as the cut in permanent places is the tightening of temporary visa schemes, AIJ, category that includes the influx of international students, temporary graduates, working holidaymakers, and employer-sponsored workers. In 2023, Australia issued over 900,000 temporary visas, accounting for nearly 3% of the national population. By mid-2025, most of these pathways will be subject to new caps, higher fees, and tougher eligibility tests. International students, once permitted to enroll virtually without limit, now face an annual cap of 270,000 new student visas, a significant rollback from the nearly 550,000 granted in 2022-23. To qualify, applicants must demonstrate a higher level of English proficiency, raising IELTS band requirements by half a band across most visa subclasses, and lodge bank statements showing disposable funds equivalent to at least AUD 30,000 per year, up from AUD 20,000. Visa application fees will climb from AUD 710 to as much as AUD 1,600, and providers will need to meet new employability outcome benchmarks or lose their rights to enroll overseas students. Temporary graduates holding the subclass 485 visa, often seen as a stepping stone to skilled permanent pathways, will find their options narrowed too. The post-study workstream will require 2 years of continuous employment in an occupation listed on the skilled occupation list before eligibility for a further permanent visa is granted. And skilled work visa holders under subclass 482 will face higher minimum annual salaries, increasing to AUD 65,000 across all states and occupations, and more rigorous labour market testing to prove that no Australian citizen or permanent resident can fill the role. Finally, the agricultural and hospitality sectors, traditionally reliant on working holiday and seasonal worker program participants, will have to navigate new quotas based on previous year arrivals and industry-sponsored training commitments. The result is a leaner, more selective temporary population, designed to ease pressure on rental markets and service systems. Yet as thousands of students, graduates, and backpackers find their options narrowed, critics warn that the unintended consequences could ripple through local economies that have grown dependent on international spending and seasonal labor. One of the most striking facets of the 2025 reforms is the wholesale embrace of a fully digital visa platform. After years of paper applications and plastic visa labels, Australia will join the front rank of countries relying solely on electronic visas, e-visas. From July 2025 onwards, all visa applications, permanent, temporary, and bridging visas, will be managed through an online portal tied to each individual's My Home Affairs account. Under the new system, applicants will fill out digital forms, upload biometric data, including fingerprints and facial scans, and receive real-time updates via SMS or email. Border staff and carriers will verify your visas against government databases, eliminating the need for visa stickers or passports stamped on arrival. In theory, this should expedite processing times, reduce fraudulent applications, and improve compliance monitoring, allowing automated alerts if visa holders overstay or breach conditions. However, digital transformation carries risks. Technical outages could block whole swathes of applicants from submitting renewals or lodging appeals. Vulnerable groups, such as elderly migrants, those with disabilities, or visa holders in remote locations with patchy internet, may struggle to meet. Digital requirements. Data security also becomes paramount. Breaches could expose sensitive biometric and identity records. Australia's Department of Home Affairs has pledged a multi-million-dollar cybersecurity and support program, including call centres and in-person kiosks at major visa-granting offices. But even with these safeguards, the shift to e-visas marks a fundamental change in how migrants interact with the system. One where a few lines of computer code can determine whether someone can remain or must leave. The new immigration framework does not stop at curbing entry. It also tightens the screws on enforcement and removal of non-compliant visa holders. Legislation introduced in late 2024 expands the powers of border officers to detain and deport individuals who fail to meet visa conditions or who have incomplete digital records. Key measures include automatic cancellation of visas for serious or repeated breaches, such as working beyond permitted hours, failing to maintain adequate health insurance, or being convicted of indictable offenses. Visa cancellation notices will be issued electronically with just 14 days' notice to depart the country, down from the previous 28 days. For cases deemed high risk, such as those involving criminal convictions or threats to public order, removal can occur within 48 hours of a cancelled visa. Detention infrastructure is also expanding. 2 new immigration detention centers are slated for remote regions, alongside mobile biometric scanning units at major hospitals and universities. At airports, facial recognition gates will cross-check arrivals and departures against visa databases, flagging anyone who overstays or is subject to an outstanding cancellation. Moreover, Australia is negotiating third-country deportation agreements with Pacific Island nations, enabling swift removal of individuals whose home countries refuse to repatriate them. Human rights advocates warn that these draconian powers could ensnare vulnerable people. Students who fall ill, migrants caught in bureaucratic delays, or temporary workers who lose jobs beyond their control. The spectre of mass deportations has already prompted legal challenges in Australia's federal court, with opponents arguing that the new rules trample due process and risk separating families. As enforcement becomes more aggressive, the balance between sovereignty and compassion will be tested as never before. Any shift in migration policy resonates far beyond the Department of Home Affairs. Australia's reliance on newcomers stretches across the economy, demographics, and the social tapestry. By mid-2025, the tighter rules could lower annual net migration from its pandemic-inflated peak of 350,000 to under 100,000, a drastic reversal with wide-ranging consequences. On the economic front, skill shortages may become acute. Sectors already struggling to recruit, aged care, engineering, IT, hospitality, could face payroll crises, forcing wages up, but also dampening competitiveness. With an aging population and birth rates below replacement levels, migrants have underpinned Australia's labour force growth. Without them, real GDP growth forecasts could tumble from 2.5% to under 1% annually. Exchequer receipts will also be affected. International students and temporary workers contribute around AUD 40 billion in fees and taxes each year, funding everything from tertiary education subsidies to regional infrastructure. Socially, the Yashwar fabric of multicultural Australia may shift. Regional towns that have revived through targeted skilled migrant recruitment, places like Griffith, Dubbo and Shepparton, may see schools and service providers struggle to retain viability. Established migrant communities may find themselves shrinking, affecting everything from local festivals to ethnic shops and religious centres. As the focus narrows to a smaller, more selective intake, Australia's global reputation for openness could dim, yet some hope the narrower system will yield deeper integration. With fewer arrivals, settlement agencies could provide more tailored support, language training, and employment assistance, potentially reducing long-term welfare dependence. Whether this vision materializes or remains aspirational depends on follow-through funding, and political will in state and federal budgets. No policy of this magnitude goes unchallenged. As 2025 approaches, migration has become the hottest political battleground. Prime Minister Albanese insists that the reforms respond to a clear mandate. Polls show that over 60% of voters want lower migration targets and stronger border controls. He has defended the measures as responsible stewardship of Australia's future. In contrast, the coalition opposition and several crossbenchers decry the changes as an overreaction that risks driving away our best and brightest. Liberal leader Peter Dutton has promised that, if elected, his party will restore skilled migration numbers for regions facing critical shortages and reverse the more punitive aspects of the enforcement regime. The Green and minor parties warn that slashing student and humanitarian intakes betrays Australia's values and commitments under the Refugee Convention. State and territory leaders have also weighed in. Premier Gladys Berejiklian, NSW Baasen, and Premier Dan Andrews, Vic, have urged targeted adjustments to ensure that cities can continue to draw the talent they need. Regional premiers, from Tasmania to Queensland, have stressed that local economies rely on migrant nurses, teachers, and tradespeople. With a federal election due by late 2025, migration policy may well become the defining wedge issue of the ICE campaign, shaping both ballots and national identity debates. The proposed reforms have drawn a spectrum of responses from groups whose livelihoods or missions are intertwined with migration. Migrant rights advocates, such as the Refugee Council of Australia and Amnesty International, have condemned the tougher enforcement provisions and the risk of digital exclusion. They warn that mass cancellations could leave vulnerable people destitute and contravene Australia's international human rights obligations. Universities and training providers, through Universities Australia and the International Education Association, argue that student visa caps and fee hikes will decimate an industry worth AUD 40 billion annually. Regional campuses, reliant on international fee income, foresee staff layoffs and reduced research capacity. Business and industry groups, including the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, voice alarm at potential skill shortages. The construction, hospitality, and aged care sectors warn that without access to overseas workers, project timelines will slip, care home vacancies will grow, and wage inflation will accelerate at a pace that could stifle investment. Regional councils highlight mixed impacts. Some fear losing migrant nurses and teachers, while others welcome the chance to strengthen domestic training programs. A handful of councils that pioneered innovative retention incentives, such as permanent residency guarantees for agriculture workers, lobby for carve-outs to maintain those schemes. Looking ahead, three broad trajectories emerge. Controlled adaptation. If implementation proceeds smoothly, net migration levels fall into the new 80,000 and 120,000 range, housing pressures ease, and service backlogs shrink. Integration programs deepen and both migrants and host communities adjust. Economic growth may slow modestly but remains above 2%, and Australia retains its magnetism for skilled talent. Disruptive backlash. Technical glitches in the e-visa system trigger wrongful cancellations, sparking legal challenges and community protests. Mass detentions and deportations of visa holders, particularly students and graduates, create social fractures, undermine consumer confidence, and depress international education enrollments. In this scenario, GDP growth stalls below 1%, and Australia's global image suffers. Partial reversal. Political pressures mount as key industries sound the alarm. By late 2026, the government reinstates some temporary pathways, raising student caps or easing English thresholds to stem labour shortages. While permanent intake cuts remain, the system becomes more flexible, avoiding the worst economic fallout. Which path Australia follows will depend on careful calibration, the resilience of digital infrastructure, and the ability of policymakers to balance competing demands for jobs, services, compassion, and national unity. For anyone whose life or business depends on Australia's migration system, preparation is vital. Stay informed. Bookmark the Department of Home Affairs website and set news alerts for migration policy updates. Secure documentation early. Convert any pending paper or bridging visas to e-visas well before deadlines. Keep digital copies of all health checks, employment contracts, and character certificates in your My Home Affairs portal. Seek professional guidance. Engage a registered migration agent or lawyer specialized in Australian immigration to review eligibility under the tightened criteria, ideally at least 6 months before your current visa expires. Broaden your options. Research alternative visa pathways, such as regional employer-sponsored schemes, global talent visas, or family reunion subclasses that may have separate thresholds.